Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Ask the Bible. I'm Curtis Campbell. I'll be hosting this show tonight. Um, Unfortunately, life happens, and Sergeant Roy won't be able to make it with us uh, tonight. Hopefully, he'll be able to pop in, but if not, we'll see him next week. So we originally were gonna do talk about how do we know God? How do we, objectively, subjectively know God? But we'll table that for another episode. Tonight, I wanted to talk about, figure out change it up. We'll talk about the flood. Been reading a really good book called The Genesis Flood. It was actually written in the um, 50s. It kind of was the catalyst for um, r- restarting creation science research and turning the tables on what started in the 1700s was a redefining of the flood within the geological community and within the Christian community. Theologians jumped on board with the idea that the flood was local, or the flood wasn't actually turbulent or violent to have caused any damage. And then on top of that, I figure we try to do the screen sharing thing. So we're gonna go through. My plan is to just we'll go through a little bit of the text and um, talk about it and give some points in regards to how would a Christian interpret the geologic data, so to speak, in terms of uh, Genesis 6 and 7. So I got the Christian Standard Bible open, and the discussion of the flood starts in chapter 6 and goes through chapter 7. I think a little bit in chapter 8 as well. Um, so it starts out for the reason God um, calls the flood. Why did He decree it to happen? Why did He cause it to happen? And it plainly says that the Lord saw how widespread human wickedness was upon the earth. So it's talking the whole earth, that the inclination of everybody's mind was evil. Uh Christian Standard Bible in verse 6 here says the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth. That Hebrew word, different translations do it translate it differently. Some translate it repent, some grieved. In this context, it says, with the Christian Standard Bible, the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was deeply grieved. So it's really talking about um, God felt grief, emotional pain over how wicked um, his creation was. I mean, he made us in his image, and here we are. Um, Here we are with the mind full of evil and acting that wickedness out. So then the Lord said, I will wipe mankind, whom I created, off the face of the earth, together with the animals, creatures that crawl, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. Right? He's just talking about how there's so much evil on the earth. God feels grief over it, and he's going to judge mankind and the earth. Remember in Genesis chapter 2 or 3, um, God gives man the authority. God gives Adam and Eve the authority over the earth, over the plants and the animals. So when the fall happened, not only did it change, um, not only did it change our nature, it also changed the nature of the earth as well. I mean, there weren't thorns before. There weren't thorns in the garden, right? After the fall, God created thorns and thistles and made it uh caused it to where we had to work pretty hard to obtain food. So because of us, God was going to destroy not only mankind but the earth essentially. So thankfully, Noah found favor with the Lord. So it says that Noah walked with God. Not many people are described as walking with God, but when they are, they're uh, a highly righteous type of person with a lot of faith in the Old Testament. You know, you're talking about like Abraham, um, Enoch, and Noah, Moses, people like that. So now it says, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with wickedness. He saw how corrupt the earth was. Every creature had corrupted its own way on the earth. This is including the animals. If you remember in the beginning, it seems like in the garden everybody ate vegetables, right? Everybody was vegetarian. Uh, I've decided to put an end to every creature, for the earth is filled with wickedness because of them. So this is setting up that every God's gonna judge everything. Okay, now the flood was we haven't even really gotten into the flood, but the flood was local. Um, it wouldn't really make sense to say that to say he's gonna put an end to every creature if the flood only happened in um in the Middle East. So so then God tells Noah to make the ark. Uh, I was in on vacation a couple weeks ago in Kentucky. Me and my wife and the girls, we actually went to the Ark Museum. When you read here, the ark was 450 feet long. That's roughly what we think it is. I mean, um, the Christian Standard Bible kind of converts cubits to feet for you, but there are different measurements for cubits. But it's about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. This is a large, basically barge, right? This thing doesn't have sails and a motor. It can't like steer itself or guide itself. It says here, understanding that I am bringing a flood waters on the earth to destroy every creature under heaven with the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. I've been watching some debates and talks online with creationist Christians and Christians that believe in evolution and don't take this passage literally, but we just kind of gotten into it, and God repeatedly is talking about how widespread this judgment's going to be. I don't know how you could read this and not interpret it through a literary lens, especially since the book of Genesis is written as a, a history book. It's not written like Psalms or Song of Solomon or Proverbs, right? It's written as actual historical fact that it happened. Um, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you will enter the ark. So he's going to establish his covenant with Noah, and this is key. Okay, the covenant is with Noah. Noah is going to be the only man, along with his family, alive. He's going to establish the covenant with him. So all the descendants after Noah are are going to have are going to be part of this covenant. They're going to be blessed by it. Okay, if you got people living, if the flood wasn't widespread and you got people living halfway across the world, they're not going to be descendant of Noah. They're they're going to be out of the covenant. This theologically doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So this talks about two of every kind. Take with you two of every kind. Noah did this. He did everything that God commanded him. Uh, then it talks about entering the ark. Let's see here. So Noah was 600 years old when the flood came and water covered the earth. See, I'm trying to get to a specific 7 days. So he's saying basically they enter the ark, the animals enter, and then 7 days after that, the flood waters will come. So in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, on the 17th day of the month, okay, you don't get sentences like that in poetry and um, non-literal literary writings, especially in the Bible. On that day, all the sources of the vast watery depths burst open. Okay, I have what I normally read out of is the New American Standard, and here it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, 17th day, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open. The great deep is referring to the oceans. Um, so this is talking about a worldwide bursting forth from the very depths of the oceans, talking like volcanic activity, maybe even like subterranean water bursting forth. But we know modern science wise that there's been great volcanic activity in the oceans along the Platonic tape. Platonic. I don't know if I'm saying that right. You know what I'm talking about. Along the plates, right? There's a lot of volcanic activity, a lot of and if you've ever seen a video of Mount St. Helen, which wasn't I mean, it was a big volcano, but there's been far bigger volcanoes that we know about. Imagine all of these plates bursting forth with volcanic activity. Okay, it's going to do a couple things. It's going to heat the water up. When water heats up, vast amounts of water get evaporated into the air and completely saturate the air with water. There's going to be tons of storms, right? I mean, in the summer, toward the end of the summer, hurricanes become active. The warmer the ocean, the stronger the hurricanes, right? So, widespread global uh, volcanic activity under the oceans is going to heat the oceans up a great deal. Great deal. It's also going to kill a lot of marine life. Um, and it's going to supercharge the atmosphere essentially, right? There's going to be the storms are going to kick up. So then the earth breaks open like an egg basically. Floodgates of the sky were opened and rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So and this isn't just, a light rain shower. We're talking crazy, insane amounts of torrential downpour rain 24 hours a day for 40 days and 40 nights across the whole globe. And that goes about talking about the animals again. This is kind of interesting. Then the Lord shut him up. So when they all got in the ark, I mean, how did Noah? Uh, here's Sergeant Roy.
Hey,
Hey,
what's going on?
what's up, Sergeant Roy? I went ahead and went live, man.
Good. Glad you did. I just
Yeah.
got out of class, man. We ran a little late tonight.
Oh, that's cool, brother. I
What's going
I
on?
didn't
Where are
know.
we? What's going on? We in the series?
Well, the whole Solo Scriptura series kind of ended, and I didn't know if you were going to be able to make it, so I just went ahead and started talking about the flood.
Okay, go ahead. Continue on.
Are
Continue
you
on.
sure we could talk about? Okay. So I'm just going over. I'm sharing my screen here,
I
trying a
see
new
it.
feature out,
I see it.
and I'm just kind of going through some of the passages in the flood because there's even Christians that don't believe the flood was global, or that even for some reason some Christians don't believe it was um, like damaging,
Right.
because of the olive leaf at the end, and so yeah, we're just kind of going through the passage, And
Okay.
started out in chapter 6. Now we're in 7. So we're at the 40 days and 40 nights. I just got done talking about how the volcanic activity heating up the oceans, lots of rain. So we see, God says the water surge and increase greatly on the earth. This isn't talking about the Middle East. It's talking about the whole earth, right? Water surged even higher on the earth. Now, this is key. All the high mountains under the whole sky were covered. Other translations say all the high mountains under the heavens were covered. I
Wow.
mean, yeah. If you think about sort of what you ever seen water run downhill?
Yeah.
Yeah, it runs downhill, right?
Yeah.
If you have water covering a high mountain and sustaining that, wouldn't that imply that that was the water level across the whole earth? Because if water's at a high level and there's a low level without water, wouldn't the water run down and the water level would decrease to
Yeah.
equalize?
Right.
Um, every creature perished. So I was explaining to them how I've been watching some debates and stuff between Christians and atheists and Christians regarding the flood. I don't know how more clear that could be. Every creature perished. Yeah, it's not every creature in Turkey or Israel, right?
Right.
Every creature, those that crawl, and even God, like, it goes on, crawl on the earth, birds, livestock, wildlife, anything that swarms on the earth, as well as all mankind. Everything with the breath of the spirit of life in its nostrils. I don't know how God can be more clear than this. Everything on dry land died. He wiped out every living thing. Um, and I mean, what do we see in rock layers? Thousands of feet thick of fossils.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to like kind of highlight um, some points in here where to me it's clear that what we know about modern geology corroborates the flood.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, wow.
So and then it just talks about the water surge on the earth for 150 days. So it's raining for 40 days, 40 nights, and then the water stays level for 150 days. Um, and then it goes into God, remember Noah. That's basically saying that like Noah's he's praying to God. God hears him, remembers him.
Hmm.
Um, and then God shuts up the volcanic activity, shuts up the floodgates of the sky, and then the water slowly starts to recede. And then there we know that the ark, lands on top of Mount Ararat, and um, it's on there for like 3 months. And then he sends out. We know about the birds being sent out. Um, a lot of people too will look at the. Let me get to the birds. They will claim that Noah sent the birds out wrong because he sent out where's a raven first, verse 7,
Hmm.
and it went back and forth until the water dried up from the earth.
Hmm.
So this raven doesn't come back to the ark. Ravens eat meat. I mean, can you imagine the tops of the mountains are exposed, all this dead fish is around, the raven's just gorging himself. This is actually a good thing. This is a success. Some people will say that this was an unsuccessful attempt by Noah, or that he shouldn't have sent the raven out. That was a bad bird to send out. But actually, the fact that the raven isn't coming back to the ark to get food is a wonderful sign. Um, and then other thing about the then it goes into the dove, sends out basically three different doves. One dove comes back with an olive leaf. The olive tree is interesting. It can grow in the most harsh environments known possible. You can grow an olive tree in the desert. You can grow it in sand.
Hmm.
Um, you can pluck a branch off an olive tree, and a short while later, you're gonna have a seedling, and it's gonna sprout and grow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just amazing how it's indigenous to in the Middle East where they grow
Yeah,
out in the desert, terrain and stuff like that.
yeah. Um, and then I also kind of went over the covenant. So God promises to make a covenant with Noah. You know, one of the issues with thinking that the flood didn't cover the whole earth is, okay, well, if people are alive on another part of the world, their descendants aren't going to be part of the covenant because the
Hmm.
covenant is through Noah and his offspring. And that would be really bad because then that means that we would be outside the new covenant as well.
Right, right.
Because the new covenant is just an extension, it's reliant on the old covenant through Moses, which is reliant on Noah. I mean, there's all these interlinking chains.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
I
I
mean,
don't.
you had the genealogies. They what? There's only about this. You know, when Noah lands and they land on Mount Ararat, there's only 8 people, right?
Yeah,
So, um, and thus begins civilization from 8 people. And you know, people don't understand when you study biblical history and stuff. I know it seems like a very and seems incestual, you know, because incest, you know, inbreeding and all that stuff like that. But that was just kind of wasn't that many people on the planet, and plus people were living a lot
right.
longer. You know, the
A lot
lifespan
longer.
a lot longer. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine some of these people lived at 300, 400, 500. I can't even. That's
Yeah, I mean
insane.
Noah was 600 when the and I'll be honest with you, I fully believe that Noah was 600 years old. Uh, a lot of creation scientists will talk about how um, the big issue in modern science, the reason why they reject um, the flood account, even though up until like really the early 1800s, the flood account was part of geology, geological science.
Hmm.
Is they I don't know if you've heard of this term I don't know if I can pronounce it, a long word, uniformitarianism.
Okay.
It's basically a belief that every process that happens now happened in the past,
Okay.
and that's an assumption. That's a pure assumption. It's not based on actual science. You can't like test that in a laboratory.
Yeah, that's just not true. Obviously, they're moving the factor that God is involved here. God is like kind of pulling the strings here. He can decide if he wants to split a river, if he wants to, you know, flood the entire earth. I mean, they're looking at it from a scientific point of view, and that's you mess up when you start using 21st century reasoning and science to define, you know, biblical times and what God did. If God wanted to five people to live to a minimum of 500 years, He could do that. And
Right.
science cannot say that God can't do that. That's impossible. That's just totally ridiculous.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't realize is there's different types of science. And it seems now that people think of science as just one big umbrella and that it's all, when they hear science, people think of like physics and laser beams in a laboratory and getting like minute
Mhm.
calculations on everything. But when we're talking about the past, we're talking about historical science, you
Right.
know, and you can't come to a definitive conclusion on the past based on the way something is happening now.
Hmm.
Even like radiometric dating, how they date stuff, they're assuming that the decay rates are the same as they have always been. But you can't know that.
Well, you're hitting on a very good topic here because one thing I discovered and I think it was Matt Slick who mentioned it on his radio program that yes, science we have science, but then again, science cannot be proven because what it is a collection of data that has to be verified and then it has to be collected and then kind of interpreted once you collect the data. So
Yeah.
you know it's you know and the way that they do they use carbon dating, so they're using something that God created to measure something that God created. If that makes sense, it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
no, no, totally. And then they base their assumption on the fact that, well, the decay rate has to have always been the same,
Hmm.
even though you can't really test that.
You can't.
There's no time machine. I mean, we have an eyewitness testimony right here of
Mhm.
Noah. You
Mhm.
know, eyewitness testimony holds up. I mean, you can convict somebody of murder based on eyewitness testimony.
Well, I heard this argument before, and people, and after giving it much thought, people don't realize that the same tests that we use today, if in other words, that we look at data, like some of us have jobs, we read reports, we read things about they're not written by eyewitness accounts. They're actually people recording that. So somehow we seem to take, we find those sources of data to have validity, but we don't question, the authenticity of the data, because we can't say that every piece of data or that we come in contact with. In other words, like if you, how can I simplify it? If somebody tells you, hey, there's going to be, prime example is the news. Perfect example is the news media. They're not eyewitness to that data. It's just that they're recording it, or they're reporting it rather. So it's by faith that we sit back and we look at this stuff and we assume it to be true. But however, in today's way people think, people look at the news media and they accept it with blind faith, totally with no apprehension whatsoever. But yet they want to put the Bible under different scrutiny to say, well, no, how can you be sure it's authentic? But we have to understand that these people knew what they saw, they knew what they were going through, and you have to read it as if these people were giving, what was written down was definitely something that these people realized was real to them, and they're reporting it. And it's just, but we do- it's but it's I guess what I'm saying, we're using the same type of thinking today as we do it today. People don't think it's the same, but it actually is the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a lot of assumptions we all make, and it's kind of a we don't like to think about it like this, but it's kind of a proud mentality
Oh, absolutely. And
to
because we got to
not.
remember too that we can't, and God is outside science. He's not defined, and nor is he confined by science. Because, like we said before on one of our episodes before, if God is defined by science or he's limited by science, he ceases to be God. He can't be God anymore, because
Right.
then we can pigeonhole him and say he's limited by time, space, and matter, which he is not. So
Yeah, amen.
scientists can't say that God is the uncaused cause. So
Yeah.
for a scientist to sit there and say, "Well, no, God can't," speak. When we talk about the Big Bang Theory, God can't just say, "Oh, let there be light." That's impossible. You can't prove
Yeah.
it. You can't prove that he can do that.
You
So
you know
we.
what's you talked about light. You know what's something interesting about light? We don't actually know how fast light is in one
Mhm.
direction. I don't know if
That's
you ever thought
correct.
about that. So a lot of people will, they'll talk. I mean, and if you think about it, like let's just assume that the Big Bang 14, what I don't even know what it is now, the date, but 14 billion years ago, and then nothing can move faster than light. The known universe is 90 billion light years across. How does light travel 90 billion light years and 14 billion so the Big Bang happened 14 billion light years in the past. The current universe is 90 billion light years in span. How does the light go from the beginning, wherever it occurred, to the far outer end of the universe if it can't go faster than if nothing can go faster than the speed of light?
Well, I know what you're saying, and well, it's based off a formula, and we got to remember that it's based off a
Yeah.
formula. And Einstein, I think that what we're talking about, he had that equation of to travel the speed of light. So with these formulas and everything. Again, I tell people these are formulas that we base these theories on. So you're right, we don't know. So it is a theory. And when I get into this discussion with a lot of people that are critics of the Bible, and they talk about a lot of scientific stuff, I said, you got to understand, when you give me a lot of scientific jargon, these are theories. These are not facts. These are just theories, and people, but yet people still think that science is a known practice. Science cannot answer everything. It cannot answer who God is and what God is and what God is able to do. It's totally impossible.
Yeah, and the interesting thing I've been learning, I was telling about this book I've been reading called The Genesis Flood, which kind of started the movement toward. It was written in the 50s, movement toward creationist scientists doing actual research and going back to biblical theology. And there's a lot in the universe that does not fit the Big Bang model, that doesn't fit 14.6 billion years. And one interesting thing is spiral galaxies. We've all seen pictures of spiral galaxies. And the thing that makes a spiral galaxy is the center is rotating faster than the edges. So then you get these tails. Well, they've literally done calculations on this, and you shouldn't have spiral galaxies in the beginning of what they claim near the Big Bang. And there's this new telescope called I think it's the James Webb telescope that can claim to look back up to like 300 million years after the Big Bang. So right there at the Big Bang. And what they find is large spiral galaxies that far in the past.
Okay.
Well, a spiral galaxy, and scientists know this, will not last that long. The spirals won't. Over time, as the center rotates faster and faster, the spirals basically almost become like a circle, and they twist on each other, and you have this continual twisting. And so over that time period, if we are 14.6 billion years old as a universe, spiral galaxies should not exist.
Oh, okay.
And there's another thing. There's these stars that are blue stars, and they're massive. They are massive, and they don't last that long. Some of them only last like a million years because they burn so incredibly. They burn so incredibly. They use it's like driving a big gas guzzler up some Colorado mountain. They just use up all the gas as quick as possible. We find blue stars all over the place.
Wow.
There shouldn't be blue stars after 14.6 billion years.
Well, it's complex. And because I got a friend of mine, he's just all into that. He's into UFOs and like there was something that was put out late this week or last week about how the government is divulging.
I heard about it. Yeah.
Did you hear about it? Something about some aliens and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I don't pay attention to that, to be honest. Well, here's the thing about the UFOs. Let's just say they're aliens. I don't believe it, but let's just say they're. The sad thing is, aliens won't be saved from their sin because only people that are in Adam can be saved. Angels can't be saved. Little green Martian men can't be saved. Right? Only people in Adam. So it wouldn't make a whole lot of theological sense, in my opinion, to make physical creatures, by what we know based on who God is, that can't be saved.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, this is where it comes down to unadulterated faith. I believe that God has created his creation, and he's given us what we need to know. I mean, and I think people are wondering that I think it's an assumption where people think, well, God has to give us everything we need to know. And I don't agree with that statement. That's my personal belief. I don't believe I think that God has given us what we need to know. And when you start getting into the universe and all, it just makes my head blow up. I can only handle so much.
Yeah, I mean,
And
when you start like looking into like
yeah,
how big the universe is, I mean, it's
it's
just
it blows my head up.
it's so
And like
amazing that God did that with, just a couple words.
yeah, and like the scripture says that God says like the mind of God. When I read, I'm going to be doing a message on church, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday on. It's going to be pretty much talking on the attributes of God.
Yeah.
And one of his attributes of being able to be omnipresent, to be omniscient, to be all knowing, and our ability to try to understand God character is it's only something that we can just marvel at, and I don't think it's something we can really mentally grasp. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't grasp when the scripture says that he says that we were formed. He knew us when we were in our mother's womb. He knows how many hairs we have on our head. He knows the east is from the west. He knows he's omnipresent. He's at all times. I mean, and it reminds me of a. I don't know if you ever saw that old movie with Jim Carrey, Bruce Almighty. There's a scene
Yeah.
there's a scene where he's complaining, and of course it's a comedy, but God lets him be God for a week,
Right, right.
and he started answering all the prayers of all the people around the world on the laptop. So
Yeah, yeah.
he gets bored and he hears all these prayers. So then he just said yes to everything, and it threw the whole world out of balance because
Yeah.
it's the stock market. Everybody got rich off the stock market. Chicago Cubs won the World Series. It was all this crazy stuff, man, and he
Yeah.
just threw everything out of balance. And I thought it was just kind of a real interesting, comical way that man is like we just I think we just have to accept who he is. And I think a lot of people, a lot of arrogant people, especially atheists, they struggle with that. Because they figure out who's this being that sits back here and says I'm all powerful and I'm all this and I do that. And I've heard the conversations of people like, say, well, if he's all knowing, why does he allow this to happen? If he's all this, why does he allow that to happen? But I think that's not it's because there's a lack of information about God. I think there's a lack of discipline to know about who God is. And because once you understand who he is, if you read in the Old Testament, like you just started off about the flood, and I would love to have been a fly on the wall when the Israelites are beginning their relationship with God, and God's like, when they're out in the desert and God's following them in a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. I mean, I would freak out. I would totally freak out.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
he's parting the Red Sea, a freaking whole ocean, and you're walking through it. You know,
Yeah.
and not only just that he's doing that thing at a level of magnitude. I would have had to have faith to walk through something like that because I'm afraid that it would fall in on me or something like
Yeah.
that. Would freak me out. Going in. I remember the old. I don't know if you're young enough to remember, but you can probably get on Netflix the old Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston,
I
and
haven't seen it yet.
you've never seen that.
I want to.
That's a classic. That
Yeah,
is
I
a
want to.
classic movie. Your parents can tell you about it, but it's a classic movie. But in that and Yul Brenner, you got to watch it. It's an old timey one, but it's a great movie. But there's a scene where the Egyptians are they see them in the distance and they're coming down the Israelites. So that's when Moses stands there and holds his staff up and he
Yeah.
parts the Red Sea, and they have to walk through these gigantic walls of water to the other side. And it's a great old movie. The movie's got to probably be about maybe I don't know 50, 60 years old, something like that. But I remember watching it as a kid. It was a favorite, just sitting there. It's just kind of before I know the special effects are very advanced today, but in that when we were watching it, it was pretty breathtaking. But I think my point is that people don't understand the nature of God, that God's to sit there. I think it's an insult to even try to box God in with scientific calculations. That just
Yeah,
that's like, come on, you know.
it's prideful.
Yeah, that's like trying to go out
Yeah,
there on the beach and count all the grains of sand. It's
yeah.
just impossible, totally
Well,
impossible.
and it definitely in like Proverbs and other books, God talks a lot about knowledge and wisdom, and even Paul talks a lot about knowledge and wisdom, and there is a knowledge that leads to life and a knowledge that leads to death. There's a knowledge that is wise and there's a knowledge that is foolish.
Yeah.
And when your knowledge isn't based on God's revelation,
Hmm.
it's going to lead you to foolish thinking, you
Yeah.
know? And look at, like, just you spoke about the Israelites, wandering in the desert. Like you said, they have this cloud of fire. I mean, they came out of Egypt with all those plagues. Crazy
Mhm.
stuff's happening. They go through a sea. I couldn't even imagine, right? They're so
Mhm.
terrified. They only want Moses to speak with God. I would be
Yeah.
terrified too. And what do they do as soon as Moses goes up on the mountaintop and he doesn't come back down when they want him to? They start worshiping a golden calf.
Yeah. It reminds me of when my daughter, my youngest daughter, she's reading the Bible and she was telling me, she said, "Dad, if I was the Israelites, every time God would, they get disobedient, then God would rescue them, and then
Yeah.
they get disobedient again, back and forth, back and forth." And my daughter was telling me that, oh, she said, if I just saw those things right there, I would no doubt just kind of comply. And I said, I see your point, but you never know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of a thing. I guess we've all walked that road of indifference in our faith. It's like, hey, God, just give me another break, or God, if you get me out of this, I'll never do this again.
Yeah.
We've all been there before.
Or I've heard people say, if God just shows himself, I'll believe in him. Well, I mean, God showed himself in Jesus Christ and we killed him. You know what I mean? The Jewish people killed him. They witnessed his miracles,
Mhm.
claimed he was of the devil. You know,
Well, people have to understand that, when you go back to even the Old Testament, God had to hide Moses in the cliff of the rock as he went by.
yeah, because he's so good.
Right. And the thing is that God, no man, as the scripture says, no man has seen God and lived. And that's going to be kind of a great thing when we all leave this earth, that we're going to actually see God. We're going to see God.
Yeah, it's gonna be
And
wild.
again, we have no mental reference of what that's going to look like.
Nope.
So, however, the scriptures tell us that it's going to be something that is going to bring us joy. It's going to bring us security. It's going to bring us peace. So we have to take that by faith. So, I mean, the thing is, it has to be by faith. There's no guarantees. I mean, everybody's asking. I think sometimes people are asking for guarantees. They're asking for like a heads up, and
Yeah.
you're not going to get one. It's just that we have to take it by faith of saying of God, of saying who He is and what He. If God says He's this way and He can heal, He's a Jehovah Rapha, He's our healer, He's our provider. We take that by faith. It's our faith is not based on scientific information. It's not, our reassurance is not in how much we understand of God. And that's, guess what I'm saying. It's not based on that. It has nothing to do with that. God wants us to have a relationship, based on that we believe Him. And like you and I are friends. I'm not gonna sit here and go, well, Curtis is my friend, because I know that he does XYZ every week,
Yeah.
and I know he's this way and this way. But however, we all know in the spectrum of human behavior, if you fail me one time, then that gives me one time to sit back.
Right.
Well, okay, he's not for real. He's a fake.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how this world functions, man. Because I was watching that documentary, man, on Michael Jordan. I know it's been out for a while about the Chicago Bulls,
Yeah.
guys. And there was a segment in the documentary where they were saying they were protecting Michael's image, because remember he was endorsing everything from Gatorade to batteries and
Oh, he had a wholesome image.
yeah,
In
and that was
media.
on purpose. Yeah,
Yeah.
they protected his image, but when he started he had he wouldn't call it a gambling problem, but he would all gamble and get out there and do all kinds of stuff, and I guess they call them handlers, would come in there and just kind of keep everything hush hush and kept his image squeaky clean, and but I bring that up to say that how this is how the world is just that they love you. They love you. The world loves you, man, as long as you just make them happy. But the one time you let them down, man,
Yeah.
you're in the mud, man. Your name runs through the mud, man. And even Michael Jackson went through that, man. Everybody loved Michael Jackson, but when it started talking about them kids and all that kind of stuff, and the debate is still open if he still did that stuff or he did not do that stuff. My opinion is that if you're responsible enough, you flee the appearance of inappropriate behavior. So you
Amen.
shouldn't be having little parties at your house with little kids and stuff like that. You never do that stuff. However, but he just thought that the world loved him so much that he could do anything he wanted to do,
Yeah.
and the world turned on him, and he went to his grave like that. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but however, this world will set you up, love you, whatever. But it's like a dog. It will turn around and bite you. It will bite you.
Yeah. Amen. I think the way I look at it, and kind of what got me out of my rejection of Christ was I just didn't realize how prideful I was, and like how much I thought I knew and how good I thought I was, that I didn't need God to uh
Show you things.
guide me and show me things, and I didn't need to rely on him because I can read some science stuff, and yeah, it makes all sense. We come from fish. Why not?
Yeah.
And not even question it.
Well, don't feel bad because we've all been on that ship,
Yeah.
and every last one of us. But when as you grow, and I think God allows it. I really, to be fair, I think God allows us to go down that road until we come to that crossroad and we realize that the limitations that we have as human beings as compared to a holy God who has no limitations. I mean,
Yeah.
it puts everything in perspective. And when you finally realize, that's why I get on social media and I see some of these guys that they post a live broadcast and they say, "Prove God to me." Have in the background, have a in the background, "Prove God to me. God doesn't exist." And the guy is like really arrogant. How do you know this? Whatever. And at first I chime in and I try to put my 2 cents in, but after a while I look at that person and I said, this person is just so arrogant, and their answers,
They're
it's all
scoffers,
to it. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah.
They're all gonna come to the same realization that we all did.
Yeah, and I'll just when you talked about, God allowing us to go through stuff, this is we don't we look at stuff from our very limited perspective, and God has the perspective of all time and all people. And if you look at the prodigal son, when he came home and being blessed and receiving mercy from his father after the awful way he treated his father,
Mhm.
I mean, how much more character building did that son have after going through what he went through? And then how much more did he realize the love of his father after, being humbled and then receiving mercy and blessings?
Now, it's
So
so
I
funny you
think
should
they're
mention that. We talked about that tonight in class. That very same thing. However, people said there are a few people that said the same thing you just said. But I told people, I said, you're also missing the point that the Father, who's representative of God, allowed him to go
right.
allowed him to do that, knowing those consequences. The Father
Yeah.
knew those consequences. And the father could have said, "No, I'm not going to give you your inheritance. I'm going to wait a couple of
Right.
years," and could have went a different route, a different route. But the father allowed that to happen, knowing that the results would go in that direction. And then now you roll into what you just said. The son comes back, and the father knew that he would be humbled by that. He knew that he would be impacted by that experience, that his son would come back different, that his son needed to do that to come back different. And it's a great story. Jesus told that parable, to be exact.
Yeah.
And I love that parable, because that parable is indicative of all of us. That's all of us. That parable, that's all of us. Because God, when we come up in this world, and we were, we thought we were the best things in sliced bread, and we're so knowledgeable, we're so pious, and we think we know everything. And then God said, "Okay, all right, I'm gonna let you roll,"
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, when you have that reality check, and then God doesn't do that to harm us. He does that. That's a teaching moment right there. I mean,
Does it to open our eyes.
yeah. And I don't ever want to go back to that, because I was arrogant too. I'm like, hey man, hey God, I got this. I mean, there was a time where I didn't want to be too much of a Christian, because I was having so much fun. I didn't want to be that much of a Christian, and just
you
kind
wanted
of
to keep some sin around. You know what I mean?
I wanted to stay on the line a little bit and walk straddle that line a little bit. But I was like, and God allowed me to do it. So, and now in my prayers, I'm like, God, oh, why did you let me make a fool of myself? I mean, oh my gosh, I just wasted so much time. I should have known this, But God said, no, you had to go through that, man, just to see it. Because that's one thing about head knowledge. Head knowledge is it's not a prerequisite to know God. It really isn't. It really isn't, because God doesn't roll in that realm. He doesn't. I mean, he's that's why when God says things to people don't understand, when and you look at the historical thing you were just teaching about the flood. God is saying God can say things like that to one man, Moses, go to an entire empire, to the Egyptian empire, to the Pharaoh, and walk in his office and say, "Let my people go." Who does that?
Yeah.
And to sit there to an entire, at that time, the reigning civilization. I mean, the Egyptians were powerful. They were very advanced, and you're walking into Ramses, and you go in there, and I've been to Egypt, man, because I tell you, I've been to Egypt. I've been to the pyramids, bro.
Wow.
And I had goosebumps on, because I'll show you my pictures sometimes, but the bottom blocks of those pyramids are at least 6 feet tall.
That's insane.
And probably about 10 feet wide. And bro, when you go out there, it's just a big open field of dust, and bang, these pyramids pop up.
Yeah.
And they didn't have bulldozers, they didn't have caterpillars. And our tour guide was telling us they have no documentation on how those things were built. It's insane. But he saw me lean over to my buddy. I was on the bus, and I leaned over to my buddy, and I said, "I know how they were built."
They had quite a few Jewish slaves there.
They had Hebrew slaves, and the guy heard me say that. He kind of grinned a little bit. I said, "I know how those things are built." Don't tell me, man. I watched that, and again, that's in the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston.
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, it's a great movie, man. They sat back there, man. And then I had a chance to go inside one of those things, man.
Oh, I didn't know you go in them. That's cool.
Yeah, they're emptied out, but the guys, here I am. We're walking on a piece of wood just to get up to the second level, and our tour guide says, "I don't want to make anybody nervous or claustrophobic, but you got about 10 tons of rock over you, And I'm like, okay, that doesn't help. And then and I'm going in the tunnel, and my shoulders, I got broad shoulders anyway, so they're touching either side of the walls. It's up with this Asian couple. They were like short, so they stood up. I had to bend over a little bit to get over, but it's impressive. It's impressive, man. And but people have to understand, these people of the Old Testament were not dumb. They knew what they know?
Yeah.
They weren't stupid. They had no preconceived no ill intentions to get rich or famous or start a movement that would lead to nothing. This is this is how powerful it is, and today's modern day people have to stop thinking like that. That you're so intelligent that you think these people weren't smart. You know, they knew when Moses is sitting there and he's talking to a burning bush that's not consumed. He knew what he saw.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Amen, brother.
and when they and you and it, you know, because that's my dream trip. I want to go to Israel, but I can imagine, man, what was the Exodus is about maybe of what, 1 million people, or what is it, 2 or 3 million people leaving Egypt?
Yeah. Gosh, I can't remember. I think it was like 700,000 men for the counted, but yeah, like 2 to 3 million. And some people want to say that that was you know, a um, a scribal error, that it really wasn't that large. I mean, I don't know that 20,000 Hebrew slaves would scare Egypt. I mean, the size of the Hebrew population scared Pharaoh.
Well, it
Two to
only
three
makes
million
sense.
would scare Pharaoh.
Well, I mean, it only makes sense because you can compare that with when slavery was prominent in the United States. There were slave owners in the South where it got to the point where it was just like the slave owner, like it could be like 8 people in his family, and the other 300 people on the plantation were slaves. So they were outnumbered like
Yeah.
10 to 1. So, I mean, it does happen, you know. So it only it makes sense, you know, especially because if Pharaoh didn't do anything, man, you know, the Hebrews are gonna they're gonna produce the population, and they probably outnumber the Egyptians 5 to 1.
Yeah, I saw there's some reports that maybe the Hebrew population got to like a third of all of Egypt. You know, that's a population that can revolt and take over.
Yeah,
Twenty
well,
thousand,
it's a matter of
not gonna do
time, you
much.
know, and that's what that was the kind of the methodology of Hitler in Europe, you know, because he wanted to demolish that population through genocide. So, I mean, and that's why I said people, you got to know your history. When you start talking about it, you got to understand what's going on. You know, you just can't just like throw a comment out there and just take out your slide rule and measure it. You can't. It's ridiculous. You know.
Yeah. Amen.
All right, brother. Well, I see we're at the top of the hour, man. So, um, good session, man. Good session. And I'm glad I was able to get in, man. I just for those that are watching, I'm in Bible uh not Bible college, but Bible Institute right now. So I'll probably be there for the next couple of years working on my doctorate and stuff like that. So normally I get out and I'm here on time. So I do apologize, but we had a great session, man. Good session, man. I was able to get in on that. And I wanted to compliment you. I saw the broadcast of last week too. Good job, man.
Oh,
Good
thanks.
job. Yeah. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. And, you know, good broadcast. And as I always say, my tagline is don't ask the enemy, don't ask a friend, ask the Bible. You guys have a good night. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Yep.